So hi everyone, I'm Kaylin Fridgen and I'm the channel lead for the NL branch of the I Love Me campaign. We're so glad you could all join us tonight for this awesome event. We have a lot of really inspiring women speaking. Before we get started with the speakers, I'm going to explain a little bit about I Love Me, and then our WISE representative is going to give a little information about the WISE Undergrad Society as well. So the I Love Me campaign was founded 5 years ago by a team of mental health practitioners and educators with the mission to provide free mental health education to Canadian teen girls and women. We have reached thousands of girls and women over the past 5 years by providing mental health education, outreach, and support. We have teams in school settings such as the six-week mental health and self-love education program that we offer in Canadian high schools. And we also have teams who do workshops and outreach in the community settings like our group at Memorial University. We have a core volunteer and planning teams in Newfoundland and Ottawa. And we have had hundreds of people who have come together with us across Canada in volunteering their time and donating to us to provide mental health education free of cost to all participants. So we would just like to say thank you to our longtime sponsors and supporters, and welcome any new people joining us tonight for the talk. So Shelby, if you want to take it.
Yeah, for sure. So just want to say hi to everyone. My name is Shelby Snow, and I'm the current president of the Women in Science and Engineering Undergraduate Society, or otherwise known as WISE Us. So if you haven't heard of WISE, WISE NL is a nonprofit, volunteer-based organization that seeks to increase the participation of young and adult women in rewarding and exciting careers in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So within WISE NL is WISE Us, and we're dedicated to supporting female engineers and scientists, specifically in undergraduate programs at MUN, as they embark on their journey to becoming professionals in their field of interest. So throughout the school year, we hold various workshops, lunch and learns, networking opportunities, mentoring activities, social events, and we just hope that these events will help others develop into successful women in the workplace after graduating. So I just wanted to say thanks to the I Love Me campaign for letting us get involved in this event. It's been a pleasure working with you guys on this. And I just want to say a quick thank you to all the speakers here tonight as well.
Thanks, Shelby. So we also want to acknowledge the Indigenous land that each of us is residing in and being hosted on for this talk. We are all on land that Indigenous people resided in before many of us have arrived, or any of our families have arrived to Canada, and today we are grateful for that. So we're gonna have a 3 to 5 minute question period at the end of each speaker. So in order to ask questions, we ask that you type it into the chat and not turn your mic on. Abigail is our mediator, and she's going to read off the questions that are in the chat for the speakers once they're done their 12-minute slot. So with that all being said, the first presenter of the night is psychotherapist and founder of the I Love Me campaign, Cassandra Petrella.
Okay, thank you everybody. So thanks for being with us here tonight. Tonight I'll be talking to you about the importance of self-love and empowering each other as women in the professional and the academic world. So I am Cassandra, and I'm the founder of the I Love Me campaign, and I'm also a psychotherapist that works in private practice here in Ottawa, Ontario. I have a mental health clinic, and a lot of the work that we do focuses on supporting young adult women and adult women in their life journeys. And so it's really lovely to get to connect across Canada. It's one of this, silver lining about being in this terrible, terrible pandemic that we're all going through right now and being so socially isolated together, but we've also seen these incredible, professional and academic opportunities where we get to connect with people from across Canada and connect in ways that maybe we wouldn't have before. And so I've met some pretty amazing people over this past year, and I'm excited to get to know tonight's speakers a little better too. And so the talks that I do related to women's mental health and the work that I do in mental health education began out of the experiences that I had in my psychotherapy with young girls. And so in providing treatment to young girls who were suffering with serious mental health issues, I would often ask them about how they felt about themselves and what were some of the thoughts that they were having in regards to themselves. What did they like about themselves, and these general self-esteem questions. What I was learning when I was doing these assessments with these young girls was oftentimes they were saying to me that they didn't understand the question. They didn't know what it meant to try and identify something that they liked about themselves, wasn't a language that they were used to. And oftentimes they would report to me that their general thoughts were that they hated themselves. And for me, this was really disheartening. And in some ways as well, a little bit reminiscent of my own years as a teenager and, just struggling with things I was going through and struggling with self-doubts that I had at that time, because it's such a big time of change for any teen. But seeing that the majority of the young girls that I was working with in treatment, seeing that they didn't have a foundation in self-esteem or self-love, that they weren't learning that in school. I didn't learn it in school, but I thought maybe by now it would be in the curriculum and into the education setting. And I was hopeful for that, but I was realizing, gosh, not much has changed. And so that's really how I began the work that I do with this campaign. Is it was really about realizing that there's been so much communication and so much talk about reducing stigmas in the field of mental health, especially for young adults, but there's less being done in terms of actually creating change, creating coping, creating programs, creating mental health treatment, things that are within our community that actually are going to create a generation of women who from a young age learned what it meant to take care of themselves, to be good to themselves, how to cope with hard things. So I think this is really important. And so that's essentially what we do sort of day to day. That's what I do in my clinic. And then we also go into schools with the I Love Me campaign, and we provide free mental health education to teen girls in high school settings. So we created a mental health curriculum and we bring it into schools to do that. And so for me, it's very meaningful because it's about creating that change that I didn't really have an opportunity to be exposed to at a young age myself, and to really be able to do that. And really the objective is to create a society of women who feel empowered, who believe in themselves, and also a society where women empower other women. It really speaks to anti-bullying when the person at their core feels good about themselves. That's going to be a huge stepping stone to creating a really sense of collective society in those academic settings, especially. And so tonight specifically, I want to talk a little bit more about kind of the professional aspect of my career, because that's really what this talk is geared around. And I want to talk a little bit about women in the workplace, and I want to talk about some experiences that I've had and some tips in regards to that. And so it's tough for women in the workplace because we definitely have it harder than men. There's biases that exist. So women innately can often feel that they have to work harder to prove themselves. And I'm sure many of you can relate to that, this feeling of I'm not just enough as I am. I have to work really hard. I have to hustle, I have to do everything to really get there, And this is how it's always been for women in workplaces and in academic settings. Historically, women were home, they were raising children. There was usually a partner who was out and the woman was often home. And so, there was a time where women had to kind of break into that workforce. And so it's been an uphill battle ever since then. And research today that we have from a really great society called the Lean In Society, they're showing us that these biases very much do exist, that 3 in 4 women in the workplace will experience bias. And we know that they will, and that those women are going to be more likely to have to be in situations where they might leave a job or might not feel comfortable in a position for reasons outside of the actual job. A lot of it has to do with that interpersonal component. So we also have research showing that 73% of women experience bias at the workplace, and women of color or who are part of LGBTQ identification, women with disabilities, and any woman at a socioeconomic disadvantage is going to experience these more acutely. And yet only 1 in 3 employees, including managers, will actually challenge that biased behavior when it is seen. There's a few different types of biases that are important to recognize. One in particular is called a performance bias. It's based on deep-rooted and incorrect assumptions about women and men's abilities. It means underestimating women's performance and overestimating men. Essentially, a bias in our workplace will exist in most workplaces to believe that typically a man is going to outperform a woman. There's also attributional bias. It's seeing women as less competent than men, and we tend to give them less credit for accomplishments and more blame for their mistakes. There's also maternal bias. Motherhood triggers false assumptions that women are less committed to their careers. We also see double discrimination and intersectionality. Bias isn't limited to gender. Women can also experience bias due to their race, sexual orientation, disability, or other aspect of their identity. On top of these biases, sometimes we do have cultures within workplaces where women aren't always the most supportive of each other. That can also be, part of a woman's own insecurities or things that they've carried forward with in their own life. And there can often be a competitive nature in a lot of industries, which then pegs women against each other. Even our school system, it creates a competitive culture because you're graded according to the other students. There's very high expectations for your performance, and it's fully evaluative, which to some degree is sort of an experience of being judged or being assessed constantly, right? And so there's a ton of pressure in the academic setting as well. So the workforce can be a tough place. So it's really important for us to encourage each other. And so today I want to talk to you a little bit more about the fact that I really believe that a lot of times within all of that difficulty that we experience in terms of bias, I often believe that we are sometimes our biggest barrier to us going forward successfully in our career. And so I want to talk a little bit more about our experience with self-criticism and how hard we can be on ourselves and how that can create a barrier for you as you move forward with your professional career. So many of us are plagued with a strong inner critical thought process. We all have, these kind of voices in our head, sometimes really happy, sometimes normal, sometimes really cuckoo or whatever, right? So we all have self-talk processes. Very specifically to our talk tonight, I want to talk about our inner critical voice. That voice sounds like, I'm not good enough. I'm no good. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not skinny enough. I'm not as smart as her. I wish I looked differently. I'm stupid. Some of these thoughts might be familiar to you yourself. So some of these things are often common for women to experience. So when we pair these types of thought processes with the challenges that already exist within the workforce, we're now moving through what I would call a really tough internal and silent battle as a woman. So for many women in the workforce, we're naturally inclined to want to do more, to want to be better. That's how we're sort of wired as humans, is to kind of push ourselves forward, right? And when we can't kind of support ourselves in our thought processes, to believe in ourselves, to know that we can do it, we make a really, really tough place to move forward through. And I'll tell you a bit about my personal experience of that. So I want to go back to when I graduated, because I know a lot of our listeners tonight are students. So I really want to talk about this part of my life and maybe hopefully share some wisdom, if we can call it that. So when I graduated, so graduation into the world. So I was in school for 8 years. So what that meant was I had a nice little safety net of comfort, normal. I had my identity. I knew what I was doing. I had those, day-to-day deliverables. I had a path. When I graduated, I had big goals for myself, but I wanted to work in private practice. So I had a lot of good motivation because I was raised by a mother who really taught me that I could believe in myself. And I was raised by a father who immigrated to Canada from Italy. So he was very hardworking. My parents, though, were from a generation where they didn't know a lot about psychological stuff, self-esteem. So I didn't get a lot of information on what I should be kind of doing inside my mind. And so I had the motivation from the type of parenting that I had to really push forward, but I can't say that I had the confidence in myself. It was super scary. And what I really realized was that, okay, I wanted to be self-employed, so I had to depend on myself. What that means in the psychotherapy field is that you have to kind of gain clients to kind of create a sense of salary for yourself through a referral network. So people have to send clients to you. They have to know you. That means you have to network yourself. So that was really scary for me because it meant that I had to go and network with people who I believed in my thought process and my self-criticism process were smarter than me, people like doctors, lawyers' offices, places where people might either be in distress or go for help. And these were going to be professionals who had more experience than me. In our self-criticism processes, we take a tiny grain of truth. So for example, the doctor's office that I might go and introduce myself to on a given day to get to know people in my community. And so for example, this doctor, yes, okay, they have more experience than me. In my self-criticism process, what that actually tiny grain of truth translates into is they have more experience, so I'm lesser. I'm not going to sound smart. They're not going to want to talk to me. I won't seem interesting to them. That's where we spiral and really create a cycle of self-doubt. So I had to really talk myself through this and recognize that I was having to then go out into that field to start my career in that way, which was going to be heavily based on a referral network. And so I remember, making these really nice like marketing packages about the practice that I was creating and the services I could offer for treatment. And I had them all ready in a stack, like 30 of them. And I said to myself, I want to go and meet 30 professionals in the community. And they just sat there for weeks. And it was hard because I was just so nervous, so worried, and just plagued with so much self-doubt that anybody would really like believe in me or care about what I wanted to talk about to them, that I could do the work, but to really push myself to go out in front of people, I really had to cultivate self-love and healthy self-talk. And I had to identify those really distorted ways that I was thinking and recognize that these people didn't know me. They weren't thinking negatively about me. And so I would make a list of, okay, how am I qualified and what am I offering and what are the good things about myself, to really try to empower and cultivate self-love. And so for me, really developing a sense of good self-care and a good sense of belief system in myself was really the very starting trajectory for developing a successful clinic that we now have in Ottawa, where we are able to provide treatment to thousands of people over the years. And so the starting point, though, for me to really be able to help other people and make my contribution to the world was really to believe that I could, that I had those values. And I really feel that we are women. We are here to take care of the world. And we have to remember that within us, we possess everything that we need to make our contribution. We don't need to be standing in our own way with self-doubt because the world needs us. And so that's really my core message today, is to say, don't stand in your own way. Believe in yourself. That is going to be a huge, huge stepping stone to the beginning of things for you. And so as I wrap up tonight, I just want to leave you with my top 5 tips for cultivating self-love and self-talk. And then we can open it up for some questions. So my top 5 tips, and what I'm actually going to do is, because I have them all written out here in my speaking notes, I'm going to copy and paste into the chat so that if these are some things that you want to practice, that you'll have that with you to take a look at this week. And I really would say practice. If there's one of these things that speaks to you, because practice, practice, practice. For so many years as women, we defeat ourselves. So it takes a lot of, I call it like airtime. Write it down, say it in the mirror, put post-its all over the place, because your brain needs to see it to believe it, because it's been so conditioned and wired through that habitual self-talk. And now we need to make those new habits for self-love. So my top 5 tips are: make a list often of the best traits that you believe you currently possess. These are your realistic traits and things that are really within you. Create a self-check in moments for your self-talk. So self-check in moments throughout the day through what I call a thought record. checking in on how you're thinking, how you're feeling, and if those thoughts are realistic and fair. And there might be a way for you to think more realistically towards yourself. Talk about your fears out loud. Your friends feel the same way, and you are really, going to get a really good mirror and lens, because a lot of the stuff that we say to ourselves is really stupid and really silly. And so our friends will tell us like, no, what are you talking about? And they'll remind us of those traits. To that point, number 4 is ascribe to the belief, if I wouldn't say it to a friend, don't say it to myself. For example, when I was thinking about walking into those doctor's office to get to know those doctors, I was yelling in my self-talk to myself saying, nobody's going to want to talk to you. And think about that. Would you ever say that to your friend? Your friend says to you, hey, look, I'm going to go out and do this thing. And you're like, oh gosh, no one wants to talk to you. Don't go and do that. You would never do that. So it just helps us see how hard and unnecessarily hard we can be on ourselves. And when we use that question, would I say it to a friend, it reminds us of the self-compassion that we would give to others and to give that to ourselves. And the last is take care of yourself, making time for yourself each week for self-care, because if you enjoy spending time with yourself, you're going to begin to like yourself more, and you will want to do good things for this person that you like more, and the hard things that you need to do for your career. And so I'll end there, and then we can open it up for questions. And thank you very much for listening to me talk for those few minutes. And I hope you found maybe just one tiny thing that was helpful that you can carry with you in your own life.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. So as we mentioned, we are going to do a brief question period in between each of our speakers. So if you have any questions, please type them in the chat, and we will work through those. And I do also want to highlight the fact that if we are going through the night and you do come up with a question that maybe you wanted to ask, but you didn't get a chance to, still put it in the chat, because if we have some time at the end, we are going to do another question and answer period, a more general one for all or any of our speakers, or could be a specific question. I'm actually going to start off our question period though. So Cassandra, you did mention a couple of different biases, performance, maternal, things like that. What do you think are some things that we as young professionals and students could maybe do to help combat these biases when we go out into different workplaces or classes or things like that?
I think this is definitely the starting point, is being aware of those biases, right? And recognizing that many of us do move through life with a certain degree of privilege and haven't been exposed to some of the hard things that other people may have. And so absolutely talking and dialoguing and reading and learning, because awareness is huge. So the first step is definitely becoming aware. And with everything that's been going on in the world this year, there's so much good educational stuff that's so to access online these days. And so self-educating yourself. The second piece would be to say, we talk a lot about like taking action, because as I was reading in some of those statistics that most of us won't do anything. And so it's just that question of like, it's not just like, oh no, we might kind of say like, oh, I don't think that way, I would never act that way. But it's actually to tell myself, well, what action did I take specifically to make sure that I didn't behave that way, or that I didn't bring that bias into that setting? Did I make a very specific intentional effort to operate in a way that was unbiased, or in a way that was compassionate, supportive, welcoming, and inclusive to everybody that was there? So that intentional action is huge too.
Great, thank you. We do have a question that just popped up in the chat, if you're a person who likes to read questions, but I will list it out for everyone. So what has been the most rewarding experience in your career so far? If you could pick one that maybe comes to your mind.
Oh, that's such a big question. Okay, I mean, let me try and think of what comes to mind right away. I think for me, it is when I go into the school settings, I facilitate this program that we created called the 6-week self-love and mental health education program. So we create these groups of girls within high school settings, young girls, who are either struggling with their mental health in some way or are simply taking part in the course through their health class. So it's part of their physical education component, or the guidance counselors bring us together with a group of girls that would really benefit. So we facilitate this program with these young girls. And I would say what's most rewarding to me is not specifically what I'm doing to them or teaching to them. It's, for me, it's content that I'm familiar with. I share it with them. I teach them about how to take care of their mental health as a teen. But what's most rewarding to me is how vulnerably they share their stories with me and with each other. And listening to these young girls talk to me about how they feel or what's happening in their school and how they support each other, I am in awe of that, because I don't think I could have done that when I was growing up. I remember being really scared to be vulnerable, really kind of self-conscious and having a lot of thoughts and feelings and hiding them a lot of the times. And so when these girls show up to those sessions and I'm a stranger to them, I maybe only known them for 2 or 3 weeks, and they talk to me about what's happening personally and they do it in a group setting, they amaze me by the courage that they have. And I think it's so beautiful because when they do open up in that way, they open themselves up to change and growth and support from the other girls in the room. And so when I see that, I'm like, oh gosh, that's amazing, because like they're allowing the help in. So for me, when I meet with those young girls, then I get to hear their stories.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So just a reminder that you can keep your questions coming in the chat, but I am going to pass it over to Shelby as we progress through our evening.
All right, perfect. So our next speaker is the CEO and founder of Edgewise Environmental NL, and she also has a background in marine biology and marine mammal acoustics. So Ashley, if you want to go ahead, Ashley Noseworthy.
Thanks, Shelby. I am going to share my screen. I actually have a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation to share with all of you. So if I could just get a thumbs up from a few people just to make sure you can see that. Good, excellent. I would like to think I've mastered this since COVID, but you know, there's always technical glitches. So welcome everybody, and thank you for attending. My name is Ashley Noseworthy, and as Shelby said, I'm the CEO and founder of Edgewise Environmental. And I wanted to talk to you today about the intersection of science and entrepreneurship and being your own boss. Both, you know, as whatever you identify as, but just being a boss in your own life and making that leap perhaps into entrepreneurship. So I'll talk a little bit about my journey, a little words of advice perhaps that I have from the things that I've learned, and everything that was talked about in that past talk is so important. I can't reiterate it enough. Please take all of that on board. I have lived some of that. I enact some of that every day, and I work in a male-dominated industry. So all of those biases, I have lived through many of those and have many stories to share. So this is just kind of me, and this is just me showing you that I can kind of do both. So while I can be in corporate wear and look quite serious, you can also see me in a pink hard hat and a pink safety vest, and I am that person. We'll talk about my love of all things pink and glitter and all of those types of things, and I make no excuses for that, and I apologize to nobody for that. I love those things, and it is just who I am. So a little bit of a formal introduction in regards to my background. I did a biology degree from Memorial University in Newfoundland. So I am located in St. John's, Newfoundland, and that's where Edgewise is headquartered. And I did a master's in international marine environmental consultation. And I did that through Newcastle University in England. So I lived in England for a period of time, and I actually did my thesis on renewable energy and marine mammal acoustics. I actually teach in academia, so I do teach here at Memorial University. I'm a per course instructor. Every summer, I teach a special topics in marine animal acoustics. You can see a real running theme here in regards to everything that I do. I've had over 10 years offshore. And so I spent over a decade of my life around the world in places like Africa and the Middle East and here off of Canada, working in that industry in a variety of roles. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes. I have over 12 years working with marine mammals in captivity. 6 years of instructional experience in an offshore environment. And we'll talk about what that means. So I actually taught offshore survival and helicopter ditching, teaching anybody who was traveling offshore, civilian aviation, as well as some military personnel, how to roll upside down underwater in a helicopter and escape. And so when we talk about stressful jobs, I have been punched more times than I care to admit in those types of situations. I'm the chair of the board of directors for the Environmental Industry Association here, and I sit on the executive committee for the Marine Mammal Observer Association. So what tends to happen, I find, as anybody in business, but particularly as perhaps a woman in business, is we go through this kind of list. So this litany of lists that I just gave you of, I've done this and this and this. And I'm not undermining that. That's great. But what I think we really need to kind of change the dialogue on is, that is who I am in a corporate world, but it is not who I am. And we can get really entrenched in, I am my credentials, and we're not taking away from that, but I am very much more than that. So I want to share that with you. I am a soon-to-be auntie. I can't wait. My family is actually going to have the first grandchild, so I get to be a super aunt, and I can't wait for that. So that's really exciting. I am obsessed with the ocean. I have been since I was little. It's never wavered and never changed. I love scuba diving. I love photography. I love spending time outdoors. I am obsessed with pink and purple and glitter and sequins and all of those types of things. Basically anything that's a little bit loud. If I can get something that is in an obnoxious color, I will. And that's just unabashedly me. I also love to learn. And I love to learn in regards to academia, and I love to learn about other people and other people's experiences, and I love to listen. And I think listening is such an important part of learning, regardless of whether you're in academia, but if you're listening to a friend's conversation and something that they've gone through, you learn a lot, not only about that person, but things that you can take into your own life as well. So in regards to my journey, how did I end up owning my own business if I did marine biology? Because sometimes that doesn't really mesh. It's not really perhaps why you go into science. When you do a science degree, you want to come out a scientist. Well, I've always loved science and I always wanted to be a marine biologist, but I recognized that I needed experience. And so from a very young age, I was kind of one of those perhaps strange ones that just kind of knew. If you asked me when I was 8, I was going to tell you marine biology, and it's never wavered. But I really wanted that experience of understanding where I fit in that world. So I actually ended up volunteering for over 12 years. I started when I was 12 years old, and I volunteered at Munn's Ocean Science Center with captive harp seals. And so I did everything from cleaning up poop to cleaning the tanks to feeding them fish to actually engaging in some really interesting academic research, even as a teenager, and being able to help out with parts of that. So getting your hands dirty is a really important part of science, but also understanding perhaps, what really makes you tick and what really kind of catches your eye. So volunteering was a really important part of that. I then went on to complete my degree, and I did that through Munn. And I'm very much a hands-on person. I am very much somebody that loves to learn in situ. I learn best by doing. So labs are, of course, are always really important, but I attended field school. And so here in Newfoundland, for those of you that are joining us that are not from Newfoundland, on the west coast of the island, there's a beautiful place called Bombay, and there's a marine station there, and you can do a variety of marine-based courses. And so I spent a lot of my time over there during a particular summer learning about in-field kind of things. So I completed my degree. But then what do you do? So you go to university, you get your degree, fantastic. We have this wonderful piece of paper we've all worked so hard for. And now what do we do with it? And isn't that the million-dollar question? Well, I decided that I was going to work offshore. So long story short, I became aware of a position offshore called a marine mammal observer. And I actually went to England and I trained for this and came home. And so after my degree, I was pretty much offshore almost immediately. And that led to me being offshore. So that was a really pivotal moment in my career, is when you recognize something that I want to do that, but this is where I also recognized a problem, and this is where the business was born. So I actually had a business idea in my head for a decade that I sat on, that I manifested and manipulated and kind of tried to figure out, and then went on to actually build a business from it. So in that 10 years that I spent offshore, I got to see some really cool places. I got to experience some really interesting things, working with people from a variety of different backgrounds, cultures, languages. So just to give you an example, in the pink, when I'm in the pink jacket, that's offshore of Newfoundland. In the center photo where I'm kind of pointing and I'm kind of yelling at all of these men, that was in the Middle East. So I was I was offshore of Abu Dhabi, right on the border of Saudi Arabia. And there where I am sitting, kind of my feet on the chair, that is Sierra Leone. And so that middle picture there, I was actually in charge of 12 vessels, and I was stepping on board with a crew of 250 people, and I was the only female. And I knew that going in, and that's a really important thing, 1, to know, but 2, to be prepared for, and 3, not to be afraid of it. So in my journey, I also decided that I really wanted to complete a master's degree. It was important to me. It's something that I held dear. And so I decided to move to England and complete my master's degree. And at that point in time, I actually knew I wanted to start a business. So I was quite strategic in my planning, in that when I completed my master's degree, I actually went through a 6-month program, and it was business essentials that were dedicated to scientists and engineers. So as a scientist or as an engineer, when we go through school, we learn to kind of think a particular way, and understanding and having those business skills and those business tools are really important to have if you kind of want to come out and you want to do your own thing. So then I changed direction. So here's where it gets complicated, and some people go, that's strange. When I left England and I came home, I came back to Newfoundland for a job. I already knew I wanted to start a business, but I had a business mentor, and they told me, I recommend that you go and get some instructional experience, that the business you want to build has a level of instruction that's associated with it. And so you should seek a job that teaches you that. So I changed direction. Everything I had done up until my life was purely biology, and this was not. So I was actually hired as an offshore survival and aviation ditching instructor for 3.5 years. And I taught this here in Canada. I taught in Aberdeen in Scotland, and I taught in Stavanger in Norway. And this was primarily in the oil and gas sector. So doing firefighting, putting people in the ocean, putting people in helicopter simulators, teaching them how to get into lifeboats and driving lifeboats. It's a very different skill set. However, it was a skill set that I needed. And so my point is, never be afraid to take the long way around. If you have a plan that you want, and if you know where you want to go, it's not going to be linear. Life is not like that. You have to be willing to deviate a little bit. And so if there's a skill set that you need that can be offered to you, and it's just kind of to the side of what you want to do, go for it. Accumulate that skill set. You can always come back. So then it was time. I actually incorporated my business in 2015. However, not a great time at that time to launch a business, because our primary clientele was probably going to be in the energy sector. And so I waited and I launched in 2018, and that's when Edgewise was born. And it's been a wild ride since. So we turned 3 this year. We have a variety of training products that we deliver. We do a lot of consultation, and we've actually worked from coast to coast. So we work in British Columbia, we work on the Pacific coast, we work in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and of course, we also work here in Atlantic Canada. And so our next kind of target and where we're looking is the Arctic, because it's just such a phenomenal and incredible space. So why entrepreneurship? Why did you go that route, Ashley? What really kind of spoke to you there? And it really comes down to my mother asking me, what's your dream job? And I remember her asking me this a few times, and I couldn't answer her. And I finally realized it hadn't been invented yet. That every job that I wanted to create myself. I didn't want to work for anybody else. I knew that I wanted to create and to do something. And so that kind of was an aha moment for me. So while entrepreneurship, of course, is a very important word, I kind of call myself like a sciencepreneur, that we kind of draw those lines between science and entrepreneurship. And I thought about my dream job a lot. So thanks, Mom, for always asking me those questions. It allows for creative freedom, and it allows for things like this and a lot of really important community engagement, which I so dearly love. So a few little kind of pieces of advice. I think everybody's probably seen this schematic at some point in their lives, that this is the way we think life goes, but really it's the one on the right in terms of what life really looks like. It's messy and it can be complicated, and there's going to be highs and lows, but you have to be willing to ride that wave. So be fearless in what you want. In regards to if it's a male dominated industry, don't let that stop you. If it is something that nobody's done before, don't let that stop you. So be fearless in regards to what you want. Never miss an opportunity, even if it's one you think you're going to hate. Better to know you hate it and move forward than to not know or not try. So I always come across people and they're like, oh, I'm not quite sure if I should try that. Maybe I won't like it. And I said, well, what's the harm in trying? What is the harm? You might never know, or it could lead you down a really interesting path. Never be afraid to ask for help. That's a really important one. Always be willing to ask for help, whether it's starting a business and asking for help that way, or of course, there are days that are just really tough. And to have those people that you can reach out to just to say, listen, I just need to vent for 5 to 10 minutes. That's really important. Or if there's something you need, if it's mentorship, if it's learning a new skill, reach out. It takes a village. And so entering into the world of business, I am very much an independent person, almost to a fault, and I recognize that in myself, but it takes a village to be able to do this, and you cannot do it on your own. And that's one of the things that I think is a continual learning experience as we go through life, that perhaps even as women, in my experience, we fearlessly want to do everything on our own. I can do that myself. It's kind of always a line that I tell people. But you know what? There's no harm in asking for help, and it does take a lot of other people to help us along. It's also okay to change your mind. So if, a few years down the road, Edgewise Environmental is growing and continues to thrive, but it's not making me happy anymore, I'm okay with changing my mind. I built it, I created it, it's its own thing now. Edgewise lives beyond me and it is not me, but it's okay to change my mind and perhaps to pivot to something else. I don't envision that, but you never know. There's always going to be highs and lows. So for all of the high points in regards to business and life, you ride those highs. The highs wouldn't be high without the lows. There are days that you walk away and you think, oh my God, is this what I've really done with my life? There are days that I'm sure you're doing your degree or whatever you're doing in life going, oh, that was a really tough day. I never want to do that again. And those are really important because it allows you to feel kind of all of the in-between. Trust your instincts. They're important. Learn to listen to that gut feeling that you have. It is so, so important. And imposter syndrome is a real thing. I find, especially in this field, I actually asked an instructor 2 years ago if she would come from British Columbia and teach a portion of my course because she was an expert in her field. And she had to take a week to think about it because she was worried that she wasn't qualified enough when she had 15 years experience doing this offshore. And she wrote a blog post about that because imposter syndrome, where we feel perhaps we might not be good enough, or, what if somebody can see through me? We absolutely are. And we're in the fields that we're in for a reason. And it's important to recognize that you need to take up space and be very solid in your foundation of, I'm here and I'm here for a reason. It's also okay to make mistakes. We're human. So the journey continues. It's never ending. And of course, the highs and lows and all of it in between. And I encourage you all to kind of find your own route, find your own way. And when you do something, do it fearlessly. So feel free to reach out. And that's me. Any questions?
Thank you, Ashley. So there is a question in the chat. Out of all the places you've traveled for your job, which place was your favorite? If you can pick one.
Yeah, it'll change day by day, but I would say, I mean, to ask me right now, it actually wasn't for my job, but it was a pivotal moment, and it was Costa Rica. And so when I was in my second year of my degree, of my biology degree, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do biology anymore. And it's one of the first and only times that's ever happened. I thought I wasn't good enough. I was struggling really hard. I was going to change to English literature because that actually comes more naturally to me than biology does. But it wasn't my passion. So I took the summer and I did an international student volunteering project in Costa Rica, where I lived in the jungle for 2 weeks and did a volunteer project. And it is there that I was introduced to underwater acoustics. And so I was put on a program, and I told them, I was like, I have no background in this. And they said, we just need you to do X, Y, and Z. Very monotonous, you know, basic stuff. And I put on the headphones, and the rest is history. And I knew this is what I needed to do. So I say Costa Rica.
Thank you. That's awesome. Our next question comes from the chat as well. What has boosted your confidence the most?
That's a tough one. I think standing up for myself when I wasn't sure if I should. So being offshore when I was 23 and 24, and having to make really big decisions in a large industry, and making those decisions that are actually multi-million-dollar decisions, whether I'm right or wrong, was really important. And so I think what boosted my confidence the most is that I swallowed it, I made those decisions, and it came back, you know, my peers or those people, my supervisors came back and said that was a really good decision that you made. So I would say that boosted my confidence perhaps the most.
Great, thank you so much. So we do have one final question that just came in the chat, but then we will move through our evening. And obviously, again, feel free to continue sending your questions in the chat. If we get a chance at the end, we'll come back. So last question, was there a pivotal moment when you realized your respect and gained respect from others in your field, specifically men?
This is ongoing, if I'm very honest. When I was 23 and I first went offshore, I was the only female on the boat at 23. And I took no crap. And I made sure that people knew that. And so that garners a certain level of respect from the right people. And I make sure that people know that I am there to do my job, that I am the right person for the job. It doesn't matter that I am female, and that I am there to make specific decisions, and they have to respect those decisions. And so in any job that I've had, I just continue to take that space. And don't get me wrong, I've had lots of pushback, and lots of nasty things said, perhaps people didn't realize I had heard. But you don't let that get to you, because if anything, you realize you're getting to them. So.
Thank you, Ashley. So our next presenter is Sherry Colford. She is the Fire Chief and Director of Regional Fire and Emergency Services with the St. John's Regional Fire Department.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I have to say, as I listen to Ashley, our paths are so comparable of how we kind of got to figure out where we wanted to be and where we were going to end up. We just took different paths, but there's so much that resonated as I listened to your presentation. So I really enjoyed that. So I guess I don't have a PowerPoint, but I guess it's just to speak about, where I come from and how I ended up to be where I am. I do know if you had to go back to when I was in high school even, and you had to tell me where I would have ended up, I would have probably thought you were kidding, because this was not the path that I had carved out for myself. But so I'm from Newfoundland. I'm from Grand Falls, Windsor. When I grew up, they were two separate towns. So I tell people I'm from Windsor because I never lived there while it was Grand Falls, Windsor. But I am from Windsor. I did move around a fair bit because my father worked with Canada Post. So as he would take positions, we would move to different towns. So I did live in Labrador City, Gander, Windsor a couple of times, and then we moved to Torbay, where I went to university. So when I was in high school, I always knew that I would go to university. I just thought that I would be the CEO of some company. I had no idea what company. I figured I would figure that out as I got out of university, but I knew that I wanted to be part of something larger. So I went to MUN and I did a degree in business administration and Russian language. And I actually went to university to do a BCom. But when I got there, I realized how much, competition there was for BCom at that time. And I wanted to stand out a little bit. So I decided to still do my business degree, but to also do something that kind of made me stand out a little bit more. And at the time I wanted to get into business. So I decided to do Russian language. And I thought that would help me get into international business. So I did business and Russian language. And at the age of 22, I decided to move to St. Petersburg, Russia on my own and just see what it was like. So I packed up, and I feel bad for my parents at my age now, because I can only imagine what they went through when they watched their 22-year-old daughter take off to another country by herself. But I went there for a year, and I went to the Technical Institute there. And I also taught English at a elementary school to make a few dollars, just so that I could afford to buy food every week. And after a year, I came back and I went to work with a company called Icon. And believe it or not, I started selling photocopiers. And I really did not like my job. I liked the company I was with. They were great people. I did not like my job. It wasn't really something that resonated with me. So I left and I went to work with a company called Vector Aerospace. And I was their account manager for a couple of years. And again, I love the company and they treated me really well. But there was just something missing that, I felt like I did this degree and I wanted to, look at doing international business. And I was working for such a great company that was international, but it wasn't really resonating with me. And the building that I was located in on Harvey Road in the Paramount building, the windows overlooked the old Central Fire Station. And that was when Central Fire Station was located where the rooms are located now for those on the call who are from Newfoundland. And I watched the firefighters train every day. And after a couple of years, I decided, and I was 30 at the time, so it was a little bit scary because at 30, I figured, I'd be settled in and I'd be on my way. And I watched them every day and I decided, I think I'd really like to do that. So my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, I came home and I said, well, this is what I want to do. I want to quit my job and I want to go to fire school. And he said, go for it. And I remember at the time, I was a little bit nervous because I was 30. I thought I would be settled in. And I had to break this to my parents to say, I've gone down this road, but I've decided I want to do something different. And I remember I went out for dinner with my father when he was in town. And I was really nervous to let him know that I want to do this. And we went out for lunch and I broke the news to him. And I said, I would like to quit my job and go back to school and do fire school. And he put a napkin on a table and he drew a little path and he said, here's the path that you want to be on. And it's going to take you down all these different roads. You're going to be pulled down different roads, what people think that you should do, or the jobs that they see you in. But you got to keep your focus on the path that you want to be on. And that's what I did. So he said, do what's best for you. So I quit my job and I applied for fire school at the Marine Institute, which was located in Foxtrap at the time. And I was there for about 10 months and I was the only female in the class. And obviously I was the oldest. Most of them were about 17, 18 years old. I was 30 and the only female. So that was very interesting. And at the same time, when I left Vector Aerospace, the CEO at that time said, you know what, go give it a try. If you don't like it, come on back and we'll have a job here for you. So I got a job at the fire department as a dispatcher, just to find out. I never even so much as stepped in a fire station. So I said, well, let's at least see if I like the environment. So I went to work as a dispatcher and I went to fire school at the same time. And I absolutely love the environment. I love the people. I love being around people who were so passionate about the job that they were doing. So I stayed and I finished fire school. And at the time, I was living on my own and it was a little bit of a challenge working a relief job. So I took a small leave of absence and I went to work with a nonprofit organization. And I ran that organization for a little less than a year. But I knew how much I wanted to work with the fire department. I wasn't quite sure how that was going to pan out. But I said, you know what? The most I can do is ask the questions of the fire chief of the time of what my opportunities are. And the worst that can happen is that I'd be told that there are no opportunities until they hire for firefighting. So I met with the fire chief of that time and I said, I really want to work with the fire department. I don't know what it is, necessarily that I'm going to do. But this is where I want to be. And even when I left to go work with a nonprofit organization, I realized that I loved the fire department, but I also loved being in that business environment, which is kind of ironically taking me back to my degree. And so he said he didn't have anything at the time. And I remember similar to Ashley that I could write out exactly what it is I wanted to do, but the job didn't exist. So I went to the fire chief and I said, this is what I want to do. And here's all the things that I think I'd be really good at. And, I left it with him. And then about a year later, or a little less than a year later, this position comes out called management analyst, and it's the position that I wanted. And it was ironic because he was creating the position at the time. So it wasn't even really so much that I went to him and he created it around me. It was more of, ironically, the position that I wanted was one that he had wanted to have for the department. But I still had to apply and I still had to get the position. So I did. I applied along with a number of other candidates. And I remember at the time, they had laid out the experience that they wanted. And I did my interview and I said to them, I can't give you all the experience that you want on paper, but I can guarantee you I can do the job and I can do it really well. And like Ashley, it's a male dominated department. So, you're trying to prove yourself and you're trying to say that, you can be really good at something, and you also recognize that you're going into an environment where there's very few females. But then I got the call a day later and they said, we would like to have you come in and offer you the position. So I started with the fire department as a management analyst, and I then moved into the fire chief then asked if I would, it's probably about 5 years later, he asked if I would take on the 911 communication center. So I did both roles, and it was very interesting because in a male dominated environment, the fire chief at the time he was my mentor. He was the one who, you know, allowed me all of the opportunities to learn what I needed to learn, to be better at my job, to be better in the department itself, to be able to prove myself. But I had others who didn't quite understand my role. So I found that some would often give me work that an administrative assistant would do, but to them it was more because I was female, then I guess she must do more of the administrative assistant administrative work. And I remember one day saying, you know, I'm pretty expensive if, you know, you think this is the only job that I have. And I asked him, if I were a man, would you ask me? He had asked if I would answer his phone calls. And I said, if I were a man, would you ask me to answer your phones? And he said, no. And I said, then I guess I won't answer your phones. So it was really interesting because I sort of had a mixture of some that saw me just as Sherry and being in the role that I was in and how I was doing that role. And then I had others that kind of saw me more of, she's a female, so this must be the role that she does. But then I did 911 communications, and I still had my analytical role. And then the province approached me and asked if I would do a secondment with the province, which meant I remained an employee with the fire department, but I went over to the province for 18 months and I put in the province-wide 911 system. And I did that for 18 months. And then I went back to the fire department, and then they asked if I would also take on fire prevention, which along with my 911 communications and my management analyst. And I said, sure. So then I took on fire prevention. And outside of those few little experiences that I had, for the most part, I think my biggest success came from the fact that I knew I could do it. And all of the background noise of other people either assuming that I couldn't or assuming because I was female that, you know, I was only suited for certain roles, I just blocked all that out. And it was the people that, you know, the people that noticed me were also the people that I was able to get opportunities through. So when it came time for the fire chief's position, I knew I could do the job. I didn't care if anyone else, whether it was in the department or outside the department, told me that for whatever reason I couldn't do it. And I applied, and, you know, I was up against internal and external candidates, and I got the role as fire chief. And I remember when I was in university, and growing up, gender was never a thing in our household. There was never, you know, my brother and my sister, no, there was no, well, what role are you going to go into based on the fact that you're female or male? It was just, what do you want to do with your life? Where do you want to go? Like Ashley, what's your dream job? And I remember I was in an airport and I bumped into an old family friend, and he was an older gentleman, and he asked, you know, so what are you doing? And I said, I'm in university. And he said, oh, he said, what are you studying, teaching or nursing? And I said, I'm in business. And it kind of took him back as, oh, okay, so what would you do with business? And it was such an odd experience for me because I'd never had somebody just assume that I would do this or I would do this. And I mean, nursing and teaching is very admirable, and it's an extremely hard job to do. But it was so interesting to watch how automatically, you know, I was asked because I was in university, well, you must be doing this or this. And one of the things that I always knew was I would never you know, because I was never raised that way, then I knew that I would never let that stop me from doing something that I wanted to do. So, you know, like Ashley, I started out with one path, and then as things would resonate with me and something would feel more, you know, if I felt like I wasn't going down the right path that I had taken, then, you know, I had to step out of my comfort zone and say, it's time that I change the path that I'm on because it doesn't feel right anymore. And it's learning that others may not, you know, they're going to have their opinions. They're going to, you know, try to sway you sometimes in, you know, taking easier routes, or I guess how other people see you. But, you know, I just kept stepping out of my comfort zone and saying, I appreciate that somebody thinks I should do something, but what people think is none of my business. My business is making sure that the choices that I make are right for me, and that, you know, my choices are wrapped up in what's best for me and not best for the people that are around me. So, you know, I took the position as fire chief, and then I sat back and said, okay, wow, what do I do with this now? I'm where I wanted to be, and I managed to get to where I was going. And I remember when I took the position, you know, or actually when I went for the position, I remember advice that my dad gave me growing up. And he always said, never take a job for the money, because the money only lasts you for one day, but you have to do the job for the rest of your career. And I remember when I applied for the fire chief's position, I remembered his advice of, don't take the money for the job or the title, because that kind of, you know, wears its welcome after a while, or you learn to live within, you know, the money that you make, but you have to do that job the rest of your life or the rest of your career. So when I took the position, I did it knowing that I was going to have to work hard and I was going to have to prove myself, but I knew that I could do that. So when I took the position, I knew the title would eventually go away. People would move on after they, you know, after my 5 minutes of media. And I knew I would get used to, you know, the money that I would make. So I knew then one day I was sitting in my office and I said, okay, this is it. I'm going to have to work hard, and I'm going to have to prove myself, because everybody is watching and waiting to see how the first female fire chief pans out. And, you know, it's not lost on me when I go into meetings or when I go to conferences that I'm probably going to be the only female in the room. Or I know when I go to conferences, people think I'm a vendor at the trade show, or they sometimes think I'm the assistant of a fire chief that's there. And I'm not going to lie, I really enjoy waiting and then getting the reaction when they ask what I actually do. I do enjoy that, you know, probably because, I don't know, maybe it's a little, you know, yeah, we can do it just as much as you can. So I let it play out for a bit, and then I tell them what I do. But it's getting used to that, and it's understanding that at the end, it's how you do your job, it's how you present yourself, it's who you surround yourself with, and it's who you listen to, yourself being first and foremost. So if I could probably give some advice from all of the things that I've learned over the last couple of decades of taking a number of different paths and changing my mind a number of times, like Ashley had mentioned, as you guys are doing now, my first piece of advice was get educated. But once you are educated, don't let that piece of paper box you in. You know, I could have looked at my degree and said, well, I have to do this because this is the degree that I have. It's more using it to your advantage to show that you are intelligent, you know, you are successful, you can achieve great things. And it's then figuring out what it is you're passionate about, I know, you know, that the biggest struggle when you go to university is trying to figure out what it is you want to do with the rest of your life. That's a huge and heavy question to have to ask yourself. But when you know that when you come out, you don't have to be boxed into that. Well, now, you know, the world is yours. You can do whatever you want. But I do say to get educated and then just go find the things that resonate with you. And if it resonates with you the first time, great. And if it suddenly doesn't anymore, find something else that does. I've always listened to my gut. I've always listened to my instincts, and they've never steered me wrong. Another piece of advice I would give you is never listen to those who tell you you can't do something or that you can't be something. Just go be it. You'll be surprised at what you can do, and you just let them figure out how they're going to accept it. You know, don't even just tune out the background noise, because that's all it is. It's just noise when people tell you that you can't do something or you can't be something. That speaks more to who they are than it does to who you are. Like I said earlier, what people think of you or what people think of me is none of our business. And never wrap your self-esteem up in what people think of you, because people will always think of you based on their own life experiences, not yours. So, you know, if somebody thinks that I can't do something, or somebody feels that I don't belong in the job that I'm in, that just speaks to their life experience. And, you know, I certainly wish them all the best in their own experiences in life, but that has nothing to do with me. And it shouldn't have anything to do with you either. Find those who motivate you. Find people who, you know, think that you can do anything. I had a mentor in my job. I was very fortunate to have that. If I didn't know, I would have went out looking for a mentor. You know, you want the noise around you is the noise you want to hear, that, you know, people can be honest with you, but they can also be your biggest supporter. So find somebody who motivates you. Find somebody who motivates you because of what they do in their own life, and people that you can learn from. I made a few notes because I knew I'd forget some of my little pieces of advice. Never think that you're owed anything. You know, work hard for what it is that you want to do. Never feel like, you know, this is what I have learned. I've never felt entitled. I've never felt like I've been entitled to anything. I know people, when I took this job, I remember even when I was offered the fire chief's job, I actually didn't really think much of it, other than the fact that it was a job that I went for that I really wanted. And I was so excited that I got it. But I didn't really think it would be a big deal to a lot of other people. And I remember the day that it was going to be announced that I was the new fire chief, I actually booked meetings all day. I thought it would just be announced and I would just go to my meetings, and everybody would just probably send me a little congratulations. And I remember the media fury that day of all these people wanting an interview with the first female fire chief, and who is she and where did she come from and what does she have and how is she even qualified to be there. And I was never a firefighter, which surprises a lot of people. I got my firefighter level 2 from fire school, but I never actually did the job. And that surprised a lot of people. So I did have some people think I got the job for no other reason but because I was female. And well, maybe they just wanted to put a female in the role so that, you know, they hired a female fire chief. But I worked really hard to be where I am. And I never, from the moment I applied on the position, I never ever felt entitled to be given the job because I'm female. It is a bit more of an uphill battle when you are, but I always knew that it makes no difference, you know, of my gender. I need to work hard, and so should anybody. It doesn't matter what gender you are. You should work hard for what it is that you want. And I guess my last piece of advice, and this is my dad's advice, As you can tell, my dad was a wealth of advice when I was growing up, and I did retain a fair bit of it, and I think it got me to where I am now. His advice was always be your best. Always be your best at what you are doing, but remember that you are never better than others. Also aim to help others also be their best. And I remember him saying that always make sure you're the best at what you do. So don't, just phone it in or dial it in. Just always be the best at what you're doing, but never assume you're better than somebody else. So if you see somebody that also want to be their best, then step up and help them be their best as well. And that was, I think, probably the best advice I had ever received, because people got to see who I really was, what I'm all about. When I first took this position, I did have some that were in ranking officer positions that said, I won't work with her. And some said to me, well, how do you think that's going to work? How do you think that you're going to get them to work with you? And I said, I'm not going to try to get them to work with me. I'm going to show them what it is that I want to do with this department, and they will decide whether they want to be a part of it, or they'll decide that it's time for them to move on. And for those who didn't want to be a part of the vision that I had for the department, decided that it was time to move on. And I respected that. Everybody comes from different backgrounds, but it was being, authentic and being there as a team player and being there for others and helping them succeed. And if they wanted to be a part of that, then I was 100% on board with working with them. But if they didn't want to be a part of that vision, then I was okay with them moving on. And so I think that piece of advice was probably the biggest piece of advice I could have had in the role that I'm in now. So I love my job. I'm very passionate about it. I get to work with a team of people who are also very passionate, and I'm really excited to be able to tell you my story. I've been at a lot of speaking engagements in the last 3 years. This is the first time I've ever been asked to tell my story, so it's a little nervous and it's a little exciting all at the same time. So I hope that you kind of hearing my path, similar to Cassandra and Ashley, I hope that you're also inspired to just do whatever it is you want to do in life and tune out those that don't think you can do it. So I'll leave it there and I'll see if anyone has any questions.
Thank you, Sherry. And we do appreciate you coming to share your story with us. There is actually a question in the chat already. It reads, since firefighter jobs / opportunities may be limited right now, what is some advice that you would give specifically to a female in fire school to try and stand out from some of her competition?
So yeah, firefighting is a really tough job to get into. I mean, we just hired a class of 11, and it's pretty typical for us to have about 100 people apply on these jobs. So it is very hard to stand out. I guess, my biggest piece of advice to women wanting to get into this role is, work hard to be able to do the job. It is a very labor intensive job. It's very physical. And obviously when you're going in to rescue a 200-pound person, you have to be able to do that job. So what I say to females in wanting to get into this type of role is just work hard to be able to physically do that job. And, we're always open to meet with up and coming firefighters if they want to find out the best ways to be able to stand out. While you wait for firefighter positions to open, especially with our department, we always encourage you to find career opportunities in other organizations that kind of lead you down the same path, whether it's in industrial or it's with other municipalities. But in the end, I mean, we are an equal opportunity employer. we don't look at gender at all. We look at, can you actually do the job? And if you can, and you go through the competition and you beat out your competition, I love to see females. We just actually hired 2, and it's exciting to see the level of interest in this type of role.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. That was an incredible presentation. Again, as Abigail said, if you have any other questions, just keep sending them in the chat and hopefully we'll get a chance to come back to them. I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our next speaker. So she is a civil engineer lecturer, and acting director of first year engineering in the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science here at MUN. So Darlene, if you want to go ahead, Darlene Spracklin-Reid.
Hi, I hope everyone can see my screen, I think.
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about my road to a career in STEM. And it seems to be a theme tonight. It's taken a couple of different unexpected side tracks along the way, but I think that knowing that that is something that you may expect in your future can make it a little bit more comfortable to make those decisions. I started out my education I'm a Mount Pearl girl. I graduated from Mount Pearl Senior High back in 1989. I bet we have a few on the call here that probably went to the same school. And this is an example of some really bad 80s hair, just in case you're looking for some context there on the why it's so big. But when I was in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to do something that had an impact on the world and that felt like more than just a job. I really wanted to love what I did, but I was struggling to find that path. And I was really more interested in the arts-based courses that I was taking, in English and literature and geography and history and those kinds of things. And I wasn't taking physics and chemistry in high school. And then I went to a YSNL event, and that was where it really struck me. I listened to a lot of women talk about some very exciting careers that they were pursuing. But when the engineer spoke, that was when it really clicked with me. I thought, this is something that I really want to do with my life. So I have YSNL to thank for that. And I like to say to young women that just because you haven't picked the right courses or followed the right path, it doesn't mean that there's no path for you. I graduated at the same time as everybody else who went into engineering from my high school. I just had to pick up a couple extra courses along the way, and off I went into civil engineering. And I chose civil in particular because I had this desire to be part of a helping profession. And when I went through the calendar, I noticed that, all of the different types of engineering really use science and math and technology to help make the world a better place. We make lives safer for people. We make their lives easier. We provide entertainment. We provide water and sewer and roads and all those things. And that really spoke to me as a path that I could take if I went into civil engineering, that I could make the world a bit of a better place than I found it. And so off I went into civil engineering. I always start out my first lecture of the semester with this to save students the trouble of going up to catch my bad 90s photo up upstairs. I graduated in 1995 from Memorial University. There weren't a lot of women in my class at the time. It was just starting to take off though. Before that, there were very few, but in the 90s, we started to gain a little bit of traction. So there were some women in my class, and we still are very close to each other. We still every couple of years travel together and still go on some adventures. But one of the reasons I chose to study at Memorial University in the engineering program was because they had this opportunity to have up to six work terms. And I really didn't know how I was going to pay for school. And when I heard about work terms, I thought, well, that'll help, and it'll help me get lots of experience. And maybe I'll even get to go work somewhere else. I was very anxious to go see more of the world. And so I thought that'll give me the opportunity to do that. And I did. And there were excellent programs in lots of different disciplines, but civil was what I wanted. That's my complicated 90s hair. Glad that era has passed as well. That's what Friends did to it. The show Friends did to all of us. So armed with a Bachelor of Engineering and a passion for making a difference, I launched myself out into the world, absolutely terrified and completely convinced that I had no idea what I was doing. And I couldn't believe that the Faculty of Engineering was going to let me leave and go out there. And I didn't really express that opinion to too many people. I kind of kept that to myself because I felt like everybody else knew what they were doing. And it was only about 5 years out when we shared that information with each other that I wished that I had said more about that to my friends in my class, because I realized then that they were all terrified too. So off I went out into the world, and life takes you down some paths, and I went into construction. And so although I had this passion, I wanted to do international development type work and disaster relief, I had to pay the bills. And the biggest gig in town at that time was working on the platform out in Bull Arms. So this is Hibernia Round 1. That's how old I am. And I worked out there and for a couple of years, I guess, on site, and I loved my job. I actually couldn't wait to get back to shift sometimes. I didn't love it sometimes at like 3 a.m. and up on the slip when it was February, but you know, you roll with those days. And I learned a lot, and it was a tough world, I'm not gonna lie. I could be on night shift out there with 1,000 people and be the only woman on that night shift. And, you know, there were some tough times, but, you know, we got through them, and I have lots of techniques for that. If anybody ever wants to reach out and talk more about the life of a woman in the construction industry, I do think it's improving, but I loved my job. And I went on and worked on the construction of pulp and paper mills. Big movie plexes were a thing back in the late 90s, pre-Netflix. So they were putting up these big movie theaters. I did that. I went into design. I worked on designing bridges, the foundations for bridges and wharves, and worked all over Newfoundland and Labrador doing that. And I really enjoyed that. Here's one of the bridges that I worked on. And so I bounced around a little bit in the construction industry for a number of years. And I did design, I did project management, and I loved it. I was happy, but I found myself back in school in 2004 because there was a part of me that had always wanted to be a teacher in a way. And another part of me that really resisted it as well. I did well in school when I was in high school, but I hated it. I had attendance issues. I had undiagnosed ADHD. It was a struggle. And part of me felt like I really want to teach. I think I could do that job, and I think I could do it better, maybe, you know, than I was taught in a way. And I thought I had some teachers along the way who were excellent as well. And I wanted to sort of emulate the kind of impact that they had on my life. So anyway, I went back to school, and another reason for this, and I had a baby that year, and I was going on a year mat leave, and it was my first child. I didn't know anybody with kids well. And I thought I'd be bored. Like, I didn't know babies were actually a lot of work. So I was saying, no, I'll do an education degree. Anyway, it turned out harder than I thought it was going to be. But anyway, I loved doing my education degree with lots of support from my family. I got through that. And I picked up a job teaching post-secondary. And my intention was I was going to teach for a while while my kids were young, and then I'd go back into the construction industry. But once I got into teaching and I was doing some volunteerism as part of my teaching degree, it started to make me think about all those reasons that I wanted to become an engineer in the first place, and that passion that I had sort of let go about doing the development work. And so then I took another detour, and so all the while I'm teaching, but when Katrina happened, it really had quite an impact on me. I felt quite emotional about watching that, because really, that wasn't a natural disaster. That was an engineering failure. And there was a little piece of me that felt a little responsible, I guess, as an engineer, that I should try to make something better here. And so I ended up co-founding this not-for-profit that brought together engineering and tradespeople to work on specifically post-Katrina rebuilds. But then it grew out of that and became more, and we ended up working in different locations and back here in Newfoundland and Labrador as well. And so we ended up really specializing in helping other not-for-profits keep doing the good community work that they do by helping support them from an infrastructure point of view. And so Katrina was back in 2005, so that's when this was born. And that was a massive storm that caused these levees to fail all around New Orleans and southern Louisiana. And basically years later, I took this photo many years after Katrina, and you can still find scenes like this all over New Orleans where, you know, people came back to find just the doorstep, if anything at all. Because of this engineering failure, the city filled up like a bowl, just fills up with water. And this water sat there for months. And the estimates of the number of people, well, the number of people who are displaced was huge, but over 1,800 people lost their lives as a result of Katrina. And that's just a low estimate. And so we started going there with students, and we began working on projects. And here are a couple of my students, Amanda and April, with one of our clients. And again, some of our, that's Maya Jane's green in the red shirt, and that's Molly Drew in the green shirt. Molly's a carpenter, and Maya's an engineer, and she was working in Houston now, running multi-million-dollar projects. That's Heidi. Heidi is an engineer, again, working in construction now, I think in Nova Scotia. And here's a whole team that we had, and we did a rebuild here in St. Bernard Parish, which is part of New Orleans. This lady that you see here was working 3 jobs to get her place rebuilt, and we came in, we were really happy to help her. And then that team, you'll see engineers, and you'll see tradespeople there, plumbers, carpenters. And what was important about that model for me was, in my time in construction, I learned that the tradespeople knew way more than I did. And I wanted my students to have that experience while they were still in school, to work closely with tradespeople and learn that they know so much, and to build that respect and relationships. And a lot of these people still run into each other on jobs to this day, and they have all those relationships that they built on. This is a team that we worked with. This is in the lower 9th Ward. And here, this is Big Frida, Queen of Bounce. So she has her own television show called that. She's a big deal in New Orleans in the bounce scene. Be careful when you Google that. The bounce music will come with a lot of explicit warnings on it for language. But anyway, Big Frida was out doing some community service, and we kind of got together, and they had a marvelous time working together on this project down there. And here we are doing a local project. We were remodeling a food bank here in part of St. John's. Some of our engineering students did the redesign, and then we got together with our trade students and we rebuilt it together. And so that's a little bit of a taste of what we did there. Now, some more current projects. I guess currently I'm involved with a project in Cheliemba, which is in Zimbabwe. And I'm dying to get back there. I can't wait till COVID lets me travel again. But I'm a Rotarian, and I'm also an engineer. And so we've partnered with a few other groups, and my students are involved in this as well. Some of my students have done their work terms doing projects for Cheliemba. Just a little view of what we're up to there. It's a Salvation Army hospital, actually. They had a Newfoundland doctor who was running this for about 20 years. So that's where the connection came from. And here's the hospital. And here's some of the staff in the hospital. But this is the river. So this is the engineering challenge. This is why we're involved with this hospital thing. This is the river, if you can believe that. So there's lots of water. It's just way down below the surface. And this river does run, but only for maybe a week a year. You'll see the rushing water go by, but there's water beneath it. But the challenge was getting the water to the town and therefore to the hospital. And so here's one of the tanks that we worked on, and we ended up using solar powered pumps, which are just getting installed now. I've been texting like crazy today going, when are the pumps going? But we got some solar power pumps to be able to bring the water up, because the power here is quite unreliable. Then without power, we couldn't pump the water. So it's a big engineering challenge to deal with. And here's some of the water tanks that and early days at the farm once the irrigation systems in, but it's a lot greener now these days. And so I guess to conclude, my path has taken me from construction to education and then back to still doing those kinds of projects. But I'm really passionate about engineering students and engineers learning that engineering is not just about math and science and equations. It's about community, and it's about being in the community. I've got engineering students doing work terms on these Cheliemba projects, working at Newfoundland schools, maybe mentoring robotics teams. food banks and elites, doing all kinds of food security work, sports organizations, not-for-profits, Stella Circle. All of these groups have had engineering students embedded within them, and they get, instead of a traditional industry-based work term, they get credit for their work term. And this is all supported with some funding from the Fry Family Foundation, so I have to thank them for that, or we wouldn't be able to do the work that we're doing. But we've had hundreds of students now doing community-based work terms and learning that engineers really can have those really grassroots types of impacts, and that is where you can go with your career. One of the things I'm going to say as a piece of advice is to get involved in leadership and get yourself at the table, because that's where changes are made. I wanted engineering to be different. I didn't feel like I fit as an engineer when I first started, and I still wanted to be an engineer. And then I thought, well, maybe engineering needs to change a little bit. And so I ran for the board of Paganel and I lost. And then but Jennifer Williams beat me, and I don't mind. Jennifer Williams can beat me any day of the week. She's amazing. So then I ran again, and that's an important lesson. If you don't succeed, you know, I tried again, and I ran and I got on the board. And then I ran for chair of the board for my second term, and I won. And I was the third woman to be chair of Paganel. And I used to be the only woman on the board, and now we have gender parity on the board. And so I'm really proud that that happened. I've just been named to the Board of Engineers Canada, the first board that has reached gender parity. So I'm very happy about that. I'm passionate, as you know, about community, and I really wanted to make a difference in housing and homelessness. So I've just been recently named to the board of Newfoundland Labrador Housing. And tomorrow I'm getting inaugurated as president of my Rotary Club. Now that I feel quite honored, because we all have to take our turn at that. That's another thing too. If you want to be involved in a volunteer organization, to save the sanity of all the volunteers, you got to take your turn, right? So you all got to step up and provide a bit of leadership. So that's what I'm up to. But you got to get yourself at the table where where the decisions are being made and where the changes can be made, I think is really important as a woman. And so for my closing remarks, I'm mindful of my time here. I just want to say that it hasn't always been easy. Sometimes at these, I don't want to hit any of the low points, but everyone's career goes like this, and there will be low points, but that's okay. You find a mentor, reach out, talk to somebody when you hit those moments. I love nothing more than when I get a text message from one of the girls that has graduated from engineering school, and they just want to talk. And I love that they reach out to me. And you can find a mentor, be a mentor. There are younger women than you coming up behind you, be a mentor to them. Imposter syndrome keeps coming up because it's a real thing. And the minute you learn about it, it's so empowering. Like I still get that little voice in my head, but I can tell it to just go away. You're just imposter syndrome, and I deserve a seat at the table. And you should stay a freak for whatever it is that drives you and brings you joy. I lost my freak path for a little bit and went down some different roads, but I came back to it. If you love something, you own it and you be it. I remember we heard one of our speakers earlier, she's a freak for pink and sparkly things, and you stay a freak for whatever it is that brings you joy. I'm a freak. I'll share with you here. I know it's a public space, but I'm a freak about my roller skates, and I'm a 50-year-old woman, and you'll see me in Bannerman Park on my roller skates, and I don't care what anybody thinks. So you stay a freak for what makes you passionate and brings you joy, and you will find yourself going down the right paths in life. And that, I think, is it.
Great. Thank you so much, Darlene, for sharing all of that with us. Our first question for you is, what would you say, or what do you consider to be your favorite or most rewarding part of serving on all of the many different boards you just mentioned?
I think it is recently, I think it was when I was on the chair, I was the chair of Paganel, and I had to fight hard for something. And it was, I really wanted diversity and inclusion to be considered part of the goals of that organization. Because I feel very strongly that we as engineers, and you know that as engineers, we take an oath to protect the public and the environment. That is our #1 obligation. And I don't think we can do that if we don't look like the communities that we represent. And to have that finally written in the goals of the organization, I called my husband after, and I was just like so happy. I couldn't have been prouder. Like, I feel like I don't care if I do another thing with my career. I did that thing, and that made me very proud and happy.
Great, thank you. And we do actually have another question, couple popping in. So what have been some of the highlights or most memorable moments throughout your career and helping students specifically pursuing volunteer opportunities?
I think there's so many. I guess I'll pick a recent one. I don't even know if she might even be here somewhere, but Michaela Downey did a service work term with NL Eats, which is a food security thing. And she afterwards commented, and I think she maybe took it out of interest and then also to get the experience and get a work term, frankly, because times are tough right now for work terms with COVID. And when it was over, she recorded this wonderful video that she sent to me so that I could share it with our donors who fund that. And she talked about, I didn't know that I could have an engineering job that brought me so much joy and that I'm doing just because I like what I'm doing. And she said she would do it again in a heartbeat. And she was passionate about doing some more community work. And when you see that switch go on, because we get a lot of students who come into engineering, maybe because they're good at math or science and people have encouraged them, but they don't get the passion for it till that something sparks. And when I see that, and then when I see people like Maya James Green, who all these years later is still volunteering, she helped us rebuild New Orleans and lost her own house in Houston with Harvey, and then was able to get in there and start, helping herself and her friends and neighbors rebuild. To see them continue on just brings me a lot of pride and quite a lot of joy.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Darlene, for sharing your story. So I'm going to move on now, but if anyone has any questions, they can put it in the chat.
So I think we're going to clue things up there just because of the time restraint. We're not going to have a general question period. So we encourage anyone that has any questions to just email them to the ILM email or WISE email, and I'm going to share that now. Okay, I hope you guys can see that. Okay. So yeah, we just want to say a huge thank you to all the speakers for taking time out of their busy schedules to be with us. It was super inspiring to hear about all of your different stories and journeys in these different workforces. Thank you to the audience as well for tuning in and listening tonight and for asking questions to our speakers. If anyone's interested in getting in contact with ILM or WISE Undergraduate Society, feel free to email us. And we also have the social media accounts as well, which you should be able to see. So yeah, thanks again so much to all the wonderful speakers, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their night.